And so as we said last time, we're kind of nearing the end of the text. Today we'll cover. I'll mention that today. We'll cover what's next in the text. Next class, we'll finish the text, and I want to sort of save some time next class for a little bit of practical instructions on meditation on Lam Rim, and then Tantra, introduction to Tantra, because there's a little section here about Tantra, and just talking a little bit about how Tsongkhapa, I guess, recommends integrating Lam Rim and Tantra. So just a little bit about those things next time. And then to remind people, so we're in this section right now, and I want to remind you, if you notice, Tsongkhapa a few times in this text has brought up this topic, and here he's kind of right near the end of the text emphasizing it again, and he must be doing that because it must be an important topic, right? And it's about, first of all, the value of both, call it fixed meditation, single-pointed meditation, and then also the value of contemplative meditation, right? Meditation where you're engaging reasoning. And, what Tsongkhapa is saying, right, is he's saying we need both. And then in particular here, he's saying that if you, right, he's raising an object, he often does that, right? He raises a theory, something somebody might say to object, which means he's picking things that people have actually said in, his history, and then he's refuting that point. And so this section we're in right now is one where somebody would say, essentially, if the goal is to realize emptiness in a kind of non-conceptual way, you can't use concepts, right? Why would you use concepts to realize something non-conceptual? And what Tsongkhapa is saying is, in various ways, and he's been saying it at different points. We're up to the fifth point here, but what he's saying is, you absolutely have to, in order to get to a non-conceptual realization of emptiness, you have to use correct reasoning. So you have to use concepts to go beyond concepts, right? And he had an example, right? He used that metaphor earlier from a sutra, where if two sticks rub against each other until they eventually catch on fire, and then or two trees, right? If their sticks were rubbing in a strong wind like this over and over, eventually the two trees could catch fire, and then both trees would burn to the ground. And that was a metaphor he used for how the use of reasoning takes, burns down the tree of reasoning, or burns down the tree of conceptuality. Maybe that's a better way to say it, not reasoning. Right, so that one reasons to understand emptiness, and then one focuses on emptiness, and by focusing on emptiness, one eventually gains a non-conceptual realization. We're going to go into more details about how that happens. But here, in this next point, the fifth point, which is how sutra statements about engaging in signs also imply truly established signs. So here, what he's getting at, I'll read the quote. First, a quote from the verse summary of the Perfection of Wisdom in 8,000 lines says, "Although the Bodhisattva thinks the aggregate is empty, engaging in signs, he distrusts the basis of non-production." Or sometimes they say he lacks faith in the basis of non-production. And then there's another quote from the Perfection of Wisdom in 100,000 lines, where he says, "When engaging in what is called empty and selfless form, one engages in signs. One does not engage in the perfection of wisdom." And so I actually want to pause there. Again, you can see how if you, I often point this kind of thing out, you can totally, I don't think it's what's the word? Putting down people who have, disagreeing with them, but it's not trying to put them down, that people have misunderstood these passages because they're difficult to understand, aren't they? Whereas if you don't have someone like Tsongkhapa, that's what, I think I said that once before. One time I was in India and attending teachings by Swami Lama, actually on this text, this section of this text I got there for. And His Holiness made one point. He said, he made many points, but one point he made was, she said, from his own experience, that if you just start by reading the sutras, it's very difficult to understand them correctly. Then he said, if you start by reading even the works of Nagarjuna and Chandrakirti and Aryadeva, the great Indian commentators, then, like many Tibetan masters, we're likely to misunderstand them. And so His Holiness said, from his own experience, actually it was very sweet, because we agreed to teach, to cover next week, we agreed to do the Heart Sutra, but then the Shantideva. Right? Because His Holiness said, from his own experience, his own personal experience was, if you want to understand bodhicitta, right, the practice of compassion, that there's no text better than Shantideva's Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life. He said, in his opinion, there was nothing ever written better in terms of the topic of compassion than Shantideva's text. And then he said, if you want to correctly understand emptiness, the view, his suggestion was, he said, read this and the 4 other major works by Tsongkhapa on emptiness. And he said, if you read those, then if you read Nagarjuna and Chandrakirti, you'll understand what they're saying. Otherwise, it's quite difficult to understand them. Anyway, so here, where it says, because you could ask, well, wait a second. The bodhisattvas, first of all, it's a bodhisattva. They're a great person, right? Wonderful. Then they're thinking the aggregate is empty. So why is that engaging in signs and not trusting in emptiness, right? It's a little confusing, isn't it? And then he says, the other quote here from the Large Perfection of Wisdom Sutra, when engaging in what is called empty and selfless form, one engages in signs and does not engage in them. So you would think, well, if they're saying it's empty and selfless, why is that engaging in signs? Why isn't that the perfection of wisdom? And then Tsongkhapa clarifies, he says, at that point in the sutra, what the Buddha was explaining was, if somebody reifies emptiness, so if somebody starts to grasp at emptiness as though it were inherently existent. Does that make sense? So at first we grasp at ourselves as if it's inherently existent, and at objects, right? We grasp at things and desire them, or are angry at them, and that's a grasping. We're grasping first at inherent existence of objects. What Tsongkhapa points out is, he says, here the Buddha is not saying it's wrong to think things are empty. They are empty, right? That's a correct thought. What he's saying here, what the Buddha is saying here is, if a bodhisattva were to grasp at emptiness itself as inherently existent, as existent from its own side, independently, that would be a grasping that's not the perfection of wisdom, because you're then reifying emptiness, and you're no longer, emptiness is a non-affirming negation, right? It's a negation of inherent existence. But then if you start to grasp it as if it were inherently existent, that would be grasping an inherent existence, and it would not be the perfection of wisdom. So that's what he says here. The meaning of these statements refer to the apprehension of emptiness and so forth as truly existent, right? So he says, but I'm pointing out, you could see how somebody could read those and think, well, you shouldn't think at all. If you're thinking things are empty, that's thinking, it must be wrong. So God is saying, no, what's going on here is the person's thinking like emptiness is real. It's truly existent. It exists independently. And if somebody starts to think that, they're misunderstanding emptiness.
Hey, Lord, that reminds me a little bit about, I don't know if you remember, like in the Vajrakoda Sutra,
Yeah.
there's the Buddha emphasizes, I don't know, in so many pages, discriminating, and I think it reminds me of that right there.
Yeah,
so,
I was thinking the same thing. These quotes, Tsongkhapa somewhere says there are many other quotes like this, and I was thinking, oh, the Vajrakoda Sutra is an example. It has many similar passages. And, yeah, it's the same idea, you're right.
Dr. Lauren, it almost sounds like he's also talking about emptiness of emptiness.
Yeah, that's right. Basically. Yeah, we have to remember that there's emptiness itself is empty. And then now Tsongkhapa says, makes some points to show why that's the case. So first of all, he says, he said this phrase up at the top there where it said, where is it? Oh, he distrusts the basis of non-production, or you could say lacks faith, right? So then Tsongkhapa says, otherwise the phrase he distrusts or lacks faith in the basis of non-production would not make any sense either. For to have trust in it would be to engage in signs. And what he's getting at is faith or trust is conceptual, right? So in other words, if the Buddha were saying, if the Buddha were saying all conceptuality is wrong, right, is unhelpful, then why would he be saying it's bad, that, implying that it's a negative thing that a bodhisattva would distrust non-production or lack faith? Faith or trust are conceptual. So in other words, the whole sentence, actually, so what he's saying there is, if this were a critique of all conceptuality completely, then who cares if he just trusts, right? Trust is not, trust or faith have no meaning, because trust or faith are conceptual. So he's saying that wouldn't make any sense then, that sentence, is one point he makes. Then he says, in the same sutra it says, one who thoroughly knows, so in that same exact sutra, there's another passage that says, one who thoroughly knows that things lack inherent existence is engaging in the supreme perfection of wisdom, right? And so there he's pointing out, that it's, what's there, one who knows that things lack inherent existence is engaged. So there he's saying, what's the word he says? The perfection of wisdom is a specific kind of knowing, right? So it's not just mere non-conceptual, a blank mind, a mere non-conceptuality. It's a knowing of something, which is that things lack inherent existence. It's not just like a, what's the word? A mind that's just rejecting conceptuality. It's a very specific kind of knowing, right? And then I'll read the next quote. And it says, when uncompounded, compounded, black and white phenomena are shattered by wisdom, and not even dust remains to be seen, in the world, this is counted as the perfection of wisdom. And so there again, what's clear from that passage is, and the Buddha is implying, is that one has to use reasoning, right? Because when he says shattered by wisdom, right, what he's getting at is that there's an analysis that goes on, that one analyzes, and he even is listing, what's the word, categories, right? Uncompounded phenomena, compounded phenomena, there are positive actions, negative actions. One is shattering all of those through a discriminative wisdom, so that not even the dust remains, right? They sometimes say that not even a particle of inherent existence, right? We often say that when we're meditating on emptiness. There's not even dust or not even a particle of self-nature or of inherent nature or inherent existence there. And so, again, what he's getting at there, he's using other quotes to make this point that, one is that, actually he's making 2 points here, really. One is that the perfection of wisdom is not just a blank mind, it's a knowing. Another point he's making is that that the process of developing that kind of wisdom is analytic, or is a kind of analysis, or is involves correct conceptuality, correct reasoning. And then he quotes another sutra making the same point. The King of Meditative Stabilization is the Samadhi Raja Sutra, where it says, if phenomena are discerned as selfless, and once discerned or meditated upon, that is the cause for attaining the fruit, nirvana. Through any other cause, you won't find peace. Right? And that word discern, they sometimes, below it says this, that sometimes you can translate that as individual analysis, discernment or individual analysis. And so again, discerning is conceptual, right? Individual analyzing is conceptual. So he's quoting another sutra making the same point, that one has to discern that through analysis, one has to, selflessness, and then one has to meditate upon what one has just discerned, and in that way you'll achieve nirvana. Then he, then he quotes the Heart Sutra, which is our next text, right, we can say, where Shariputra asks Avalokiteshvara, right, the question, how should a bodhisattva who wishes to engage in the profound perfection of wisdom train? Remember in the sutra it says, through the power of the Buddha, Shariputra asked that question. And then Avalokiteshvara replies, a bodhisattva should thoroughly and correctly view these 5 aggregates as empty of inherent existence. Right? And again, if you're, and at the beginning of that sutra, right, it says, Avalokiteshvara was meditating upon the 5 aggregates as empty. Right? And so again, what Tsongkhapa here is pointing out, if you clearly, right, is if you're meditating on how the 5 aggregates are empty of a self, right, that's what's the word? That involves reasoning, right? You have to, there have to be, even the idea of 5 aggregates is conceptual, right? It's a conceptual framework for understanding, it's a conceptual framework for understanding the nature of reality, actually, right? And so, and whether there's one conceptual framework in the other sutra that's where it's categorizing phenomena into compounded and uncompounded and black and white, here Avalokiteshvara conceptualizes them in terms of the 5 aggregates, that they're using a conceptual framework in order to understand how there's no self existent from the side of the 5 aggregates. Does that make sense? So he's using these sutras to make the point, if those other sutras just meant, one point was he used reasoning, right? He said that sentence wouldn't make sense to say faith. If you're thinking that there's no value at all in any conceptual thought, then the sentence above wouldn't make any sense anyway, because trust is a conceptual mind. Then he's saying also there are so many sutras that make this point that to understand the perfection of wisdom, emptiness, you have to use these different conceptual frameworks in order to go beyond conceptuality. Then, now, so that's the Buddha, right? He's using quotes from the Buddha to show it. Now, as Tsongkhapa often does, he says, Nagarjuna and Chandrakirti praise individual investigation and analysis as the meaning of selflessness and the cause of complete liberation. Right, because Tsongkhapa is often, as we've said many times in this text and in other texts, Tsongkhapa is, what's the word? You know, he often is making this point that, what's it say, right? He's like grounding his analysis in the great Indian masters, because that's where Buddhism came from. It's actually now, like we should, right, if somebody were, like in the West, right, if we were to say, oh, Buddhism is this, and you're not grounding it in a particular Tibetan and then Indian tradition, you would say, it would be a little, you know, if you're in his class and somebody does that, maybe it's good to be suspect or something, right? Like, we're not supposed to make, I mean, if you make up your own theories, that's fine, if you're not saying it's Buddhism, right? But if you're saying it's Buddhism, then you should go back to the Buddha. That's what he's saying here, right? So Tsongkhapa is saying he's not making this up, right? You can trace this back to the Buddha, to Nagarjuna, to Chandrakirti. You know, and so like, I always think that. It's one thing if we say, I think this, well, we have right to think whatever we want. But if we, it's actually troubling, isn't it? Sometimes when people say Buddhism says this, and it's not grounded in a lineage or a tradition, well then that's, actually I think Tsongkhapa is implying this, I mean, that's not what he's saying, it's not the main topic here, but I think that's the way Buddhism would be destroyed, actually, isn't it? They say that, like, no, you know, external forces can't destroy Buddhism. Like, Buddhism was wiped out of India, but it continued to exist in so many other places, right? It would only be when Buddhists themselves stop, what's the word? Abandon the teachings of the Buddha for their own theory or something like that, and make up something that's kind of not what the Buddha taught. So anyway, so Nagarjuna, I mean, by quoting Nagarjuna and Chandrakirti, Tsongkhapa's setting an example to not do that. So he quotes, this is, actually Ken Rinpoche taught this text here, praise of Dharmadhatu, praise of spirit reality, which is Nagarjuna's text. So it says, the Dharma supremely cleansing or purifying the mind is the lack of inherent existence. And it says in that same text, as long as one apprehends I and mind, one imputes aspects from without. So in other words, one produces I and other, right? One imputes, as long as you grasp at I, there's going to be a grasping at other. When the two aspects of non-self are seen, the seeds of conditioned existence cease. Right? So the two aspects of non-self are, we've said that before in this text, non-self of persons and non-self of phenomena. Right? Emptiness of self and emptiness of phenomena. And then it says, in the commentary on the middle way, that's Chandrakirti, right? It says, therefore, by viewing the self and mind as empty, the yogi will be liberated. You should understand this in accordance with the statements and sustain the continuity of ascertaining selflessness and the absence of inherent existence. And let's make two more quick points just here. One is, so you see what Tsongkhapa is saying. One is like, that he's just saying over and over again, kind of in different ways, so that we don't forget, I think, especially because he's concluding the text, right? So we have to remember this. Let's see what it says, right? That, you know, that what is emptiness, right? That's what he's getting at here. That emptiness is a lack of a specific thing, right? Emptiness is not like, you know, I've said this before. Emptiness isn't some place you go, right? Emptiness isn't some other realm. Emptiness isn't like, you know, when life is annoying, you go somewhere else, right? Like, it's not that. Also, emptiness isn't just like, I'm tired, so I'm not going to think about anything, right? I'm going to space out or something. It's not like the ultimate space out. It's not like, anyway. What is emptiness? And he said, I mean, this is Chandrakirti and Nagarjuna, right? They're saying, emptiness is, what does he say? How does he say it here? The lack of inherent existence, right? And so Tsongkhapa has said over and over, you have to understand what is inherent existence then, right? Because if you don't understand what inherent existence is, how can you understand its lack, right? So you'd have to understand what is inherent existence, and then you'd have to understand why is that something that we grasp at as if it were existing, but it doesn't exist, right? And all that at the beginning has to be conceptual, right? How do you understand something conceptually, right? And then how do you prove to yourself it doesn't exist? You have to use conceptuality. If you study Nagarjuna's text, it's filled, right? Actually, the whole text, like Nagarjuna's what's called root text on wisdom, Vilamachamaka is totally filled with reasoning. Right? Chapter after chapter, he's refuting the existence of time. He's refuting the existence of inherent existence of time. He's refuting the inherent existence of self. Refuting the inherent existence of other. He's doing all these like proofs, right? So why would, and that's another point, right? Why would Nagarjuna, who's considered the greatest explicator of the middle way view of emptiness, why would he write a text completely filled with reasoning if you're supposed to not use any reasoning? And same with Chandrakirti's text, right? It's filled with these different lines of reason, right? There's the sevenfold reasoning based on a chariot in Chandrakirti's text. In Nagarjuna's text, there's a fivefold reasoning, right? Proving emptiness. So anyway, you get my point. Then next, he says, so now he's going to start quoting Kamalashila. And remember, Kamalashila is an Indian master who came to Tibet. The other masters, Nagarjuna and Chandrakirti, never came to Tibet. But Kamalashila came to Tibet during the early period, right? He was a student of Shantarakshita, so he would have been there during the same time as like Padmasambhava, just at the latter that great early time when they were building Samye monastery. And actually, I'll share it because he gets into it here. During that, I think I've mentioned this before briefly, but part of this is what he'll get into here. He's quoting these different texts. Kamalashila wrote 3 texts all called Stages of Meditation. Stages of Meditation 1, Stages of Meditation 2, and Stages of Meditation 3. This was like early, right, in Buddhism's coming to Tibet, and there was this, and it was actually this period was the founding of Buddhism in Tibet, and the founding of the Nyingma tradition in particular, that all the traditions grew out of to some extent. And how do you say this? Like, there was a period then where there was actually like a monk there were number of masters who had come from the south, right? Like Padmasambhava, Shantarakshita, Kamalashila, all invited by the king of Tibet. And then at the same time, there were some monks, because Buddhism had gone to China long before it went to Tibet. So there were some monks who had come from China into Tibet to teach also. And then the king would recognize that the Indian master's presentation of Buddhism was totally different than this small group of Chinese monks. They disagreed completely about the nature of the path. And so the king was confused, and he said, well, I'm responsible for my country. Which version of Buddhism should I promote and sponsor? And, because he wanted to get it right. And so I guess he went and asked Kamalashila to sort of represent the southern, right, Indian tradition, right? Because he was the best debater, I guess, at the time in Tibet. And then he asked this monk, Hashang, who had come from China, to represent the Chinese position. And so they had a famous debate. And Kamalashila won, and that's why Tibet always followed the Indian tradition from that time on, Tibet mainly followed the Indian tradition of Buddhism because Kamalashila won that debate. Actually, I read this story though, that I guess before the debate, Kamalashila and Hashang had agreed, whoever wins the debate, the other will actually convert to their view. So, like, often that's the Buddhist tradition. From India, actually, it's an ancient tradition that you would sort of convert to the other person. So I guess they had each agreed that, and then when everyone recognized that Kamalashila won, Hashang ran away. He didn't want to convert to but he left a shoe there. He ran so fast that his shoe fell off. And then they said, somebody, I guess I'm not sure who said this, somebody said that, one is he hadn't kept his promise, but they said his leaving his shoe there was a kind of inauspicious sign that his view wouldn't fully leave Tibet, that throughout history that it would come back at various points, and that the shoe was kind of an inauspicious symbol of that or something. It's kind of funny.
But his shoe was empty.
Debates meant a lot more back then.
But he misunderstood the meaning of that, so that's the problem, I guess. So Kamalashila was a very important historical figure in a way for Tibetans in that sense, right? Because he sort of presented this, and basically the difference was Kamalashila presented, as you'll see here, a view based on where non-conceptual realization of emptiness arises through reasoning. and where the path is a gradual one. Whereas Hashang's view was, as at least as the way it's presented by Kamalashila and by others, is this view that Tsongkhapa keeps what's the word, explaining the defaults of. And his view was that, essentially that there's no need for reasoning, that you can just that any conceptuality is a flaw, so just don't use concepts. I think it was, I think, and some people say this who've written on it, that it was a kind of, what's the word, like he was an incorrect, like he had a faulty understanding of Zen, actually, Chan. Really, Chan was the Chinese version of Zen. They came before Zen, right? Because Chan was started in China, and then it spread from China to Japan, where they called it Zen. So, I actually think the idea is, my own view, which is other people have said too, I think is that this Hashang must have been a monk in the tradition of Zen, Chan, but must have misunderstood the essential meaning of Chan. Like, so he had a kind of incorrect, I don't think the whole Chan tradition is like that. I know that because I've studied the books, but it works by Chan masters. But I think he misunderstood Chan, was presenting a kind of misunderstood version of it. And so anyway, that's what it was, faulty view.
So you're saying Zen is a faulty view?
No, I'm saying the wrong understanding of it is it's a faulty view. No, if you read like Hakuin, the Zen master Hakuin, then it's like very much like Tsongkhapa's view, actually very wonderful. Like, so, if you look carefully, you can see some, like in the, anyway, we all get, all traditions have teachers who taught it correctly and teachers taught it incorrectly, Gelugpa also, but if you look at, Hakuin is a great example of a wonderful Zen master. Hakuin, he's a Japanese Zen master, Hakuin. He's a wonderful Zen master, really funny, brilliant writer, brilliant practitioner. He seems very, if you read his writings, he seems very much like one of the Indian Mahasiddhas, or very, he's an example to me, someone who doesn't just say, abandon all reasoning. He talks about his own fear of the lower realms, his practice of virtue, his practice of compassion, all like, he doesn't explain Lamrim, that's not his, but it's many of the same points. Okay, so then here's Kamalashila. So he quotes a particular sutra, the Sutra of Non-Conception. In that sutra it says, the signs of form and so forth are abandoned by not attending to them. This implies that one does not attend to whatever is not observed upon investigation with wisdom. It does not imply that the mere absence of attention is the path. It is not an abandonment through merely abandoning the attention, which is the beginningless, strong adherence to form and so forth, like an absorption in non-discrimination. Actually, it's really a dense passage. There was a lot of good information in it. But one is, so you can see how though if somebody didn't have Kamalashila to explain it, if they just read that one sentence in and of itself out of a sutra, right? The signs of form and so forth are abandoned by not attending to them. If somebody only read that quote, they could think, oh, well, I just don't have to pay. Like, I'm just not, like, yeah, there are all these forms that are appearing to me, but I'm just going to close my eyes. Like, you could just do this, right? And you could think that's like, now I'm not attending to form, right? Because it says, right, not attend to them, right? So you could think, you could see how somebody could read that and just think like, almost like, just go in a cave and close everything and be in the dark and close your ears and just like, then you'll realize emptiness because you're not attending to anything. Of course, if you try that, what'll come up is your own mind, which is a problem in and of itself. But you can see how somebody could think, well, if I could just get good enough at blanking out my mind, then I'm not attending to sight and sound, and hopefully I close. But you can't close your nose, I guess, because then you won't breathe. But anyway, you get the point. Somebody could think that if they read this. And now you have Kamalashila saying that's not the meaning of that passage, right? And Kamalashila is saying, this implies that one does not attend to whatever is not observed upon investigation with wisdom, right? So what he's saying is, he's getting at the same, right? What does that mean? It means investigation with wisdom, right? So it means you've understood the object of negation, you've investigated with reason, does that self, for example, the self, does it exist, right? And then you come to some, recognition that it does not exist, right? Through reasoning, you come to a realization that it does not exist, that I that you were grasping at as inherently existent doesn't exist. And then what he's saying is, at that time, you focus single-pointedly on that emptiness, and you're not attending to the false appearance of an inherently existent I, right? So he's saying that's what that means. And then he says, it does not imply the mere absence of attention. We're getting it, right? Like just spacing out. This is not an abandonment through merely abandoning attention, which is the beginningless strong adherence to form and so forth. And now he's making another point. He says, like non-discrimination. One point he's making is, there are actually like concentrations on nothingness, right? One of the formless realms, right, is nothingness, for example. That's not the path, all Buddhists agree, that's not the path to liberation. So if just like learning to focus, actually there are masters, like not Buddhist masters, but there are like masters of meditation who just focus their mind on nothingness, which is a conceptual, which is actually a subtle concept of nothingness, right? Because it's funny, like actual nothingness doesn't exist, right? Because nothing, if you're concentrating on it, then it's something, of course. But it's like some subtle idea of nothingness that is an object of concentration. But what he's getting at, first of all, if that were the path to liberation, then beings in the formless realm would be enlightened, but they're not, is one point. Another point, though, here, which is something Lama often emphasizes, I just want to point it out, is he says, merely abandoning attention, which is the beginningless, strong adherence to form. But something Lama often points out is he says, we have this beginningless habit of grasping an inherently existent self. And that habit is extremely strong, as Kamalashila says. So Kamalashila and Swami are also pointing out that, as long as they're pointing out, just distracting yourself from that habit won't eliminate that habit. You need something that's a direct antidote to that habit. Does that make sense? So like just, if I'm grasping at an inherent existence of form, and then if just distracting from that were a solution, then like if I close my eyes and listen to music, I would be free from the grasping at physical form, right? That doesn't work, does it? Whereas if you close your eyes and you listen to music, you can distract yourself from visual form, but then as soon as you get up and open your eyes, visual form appears again and you grasp it. So just distracting or not discriminating or not grasping at physical form for a little while is not an antidote. What you need for an antidote is something that directly contradicts that self-grasping. And that comes about through, what does he say? Individual analysis, investigation. Right? An investigation that realizes that the thing you were grasping at never existed in the first place. And when you realize that, that becomes an antidote to such grasping, even after you've stopped, even after you get up from your meditation, your mind is now becoming more and more free from that kind of grasping, because you're applying a direct antidote to it. So he said, Tsongkhapa says, these passages from scriptures are saying that the apprehension of signs should be abandoned through a meditation in which the mind does not, these passages from the scriptures are saying that the mind does not attend to anything. Yet the intended meaning set forth is that you correctly investigate with analytical wisdom and then establish meditative equipoise on the meaning of your realization, that not even a particle of the observed object of apprehension of true existence is observed. So that's what I was just saying. So what that means, actually, I just want to point this out even for us, because, in one way this could be getting at somebody who has like a very exalted realization of emptiness, but even for us, what is this saying? Right? How do you meditate on emptiness? He's answering that question here. And what he's saying is, when you yourself sit down, to meditate on emptiness, and I said he was got into this a little bit last time too, but what he's saying is, first of all, you don't just think, okay, I'm going to meditate on emptiness, and then just sort of like, don't think about anything. That's not correct. Right? You also don't, though, just say, oh, everything's empty. Or don't say, everything's dependently arisen, so it's empty. And then, sort of just stop there, right? That's not correct meditation on emptiness. He's saying, even for us, right, the implication of this sentence is, even for an ordinary person like us, if we want to meditate on emptiness, we have to first, I've said this before, but experientially really, identify our own grasping at a self. Does that make sense? You have to actually get, in your own experience, not somebody else's experience. You can base it on words, you have to start there, right? But then you have to analyze your own experience and notice, how do I grasp, right? And that's why, it's actually, so I thought it was funny, one time somebody said to the Dalai Lama, oh, isn't meditation so relaxing? And the Dalai Lama said, oh, not for me. Because what his holiness was getting at was you know, I mean, of course, there are certain types of meditation that are relaxing, but that's not what it's only getting. That's not what Kamala Shila's getting, right? Like, I mean, Kent Rinpoche told this story one time where, like, he said, I think it was with Trijang Rinpoche. I think it was that Trijang Rinpoche took him and some other monks up, like in Tibet, on a cliff, right? And then they would like have a couple monks grab hold of them, and then push them, like, you know, so they would start to go off the edge of the cliff. Right? And the feeling of terror would arise, like incredible fear in your chest, right? And they say, okay, sit down and meditate now. You know, then the next person, all right, now sit down and meditate. All right, now sit down. Right? You want to give rise to that, like it's like you have to find really what's my self-grasping, right? So, you know, if you feel like, you know, even if somebody's holding you, you know, if you have that experience, right? If you stand right on where there's nothing, no guardrails, right? And you're right on the edge of a cliff, you know, or they say, like, think about a time, you know, where you were falsely accused, right? That's an often thing, right? But you have to really think about it where you feel like horrified, you know, like that really horrible feeling, you know, and what he's getting is, like, first you have to identify that, right, the self-grasping. And they start with extreme examples. You can later get to subtler ones, but when you're really meditating, you start with extreme examples because we're not good at identifying it, right? You know, or you can think of, like, when you were most angry in your whole life, right? You bring up that mind, right? When you were the angriest you've ever been, and you think, who's the I that was angry? Right? That's an example. I mean, those are examples of how you start for beginners to find the object of negation. Then he's saying, then you apply the reasonings, right? Whether is it one with the aggregates or different than the aggregates? Is it one or is it many? Is it, you know, there are all these different lines of reasoning, right? So he's saying you correctly investigate like that. Does that make sense? And then eventually you come to a point where you realize, like, wow, like, let me use an example, like the time you were most angry ever in your life, right? And you think, who's the I who was angry? And at a certain point, if you analyze in this way, you realize that I, that was the basis of that anger, doesn't exist, never existed, didn't exist at the time. It was a complete hallucination. It didn't exist even one atom, right? Like one particle. That's where he talked about shattering, right? He said shattering until not one particle of the dust remains. That's what that means, right? Where you come to this recognition, there's not even an atom of that existed, not a particle of dust, and you realize that through this individual investigation, this analysis. And then he says, Tsongkhapa says, he says here, right? Not even a particle of the observed object of apprehension of true existence is observed. That's what it means. That I'm using that example. The I that I had at the moment I was most angry in my entire life never existed at all. Not one particle. And then what you do is you focus your attention completely on that recognition, right? And at that time, nothing else is appearing, right? So you're not, there are no signs of form and so forth. In other words, at that time, you don't let your mind go to other things, form, feelings, discrimination. You completely absorb your mind in that recognition that hallucination is a hallucination, which means it doesn't exist, it's empty. Makes sense? And that's what, he's saying that's our meditation on emptiness. That's everybody, you know, whether you're some great bodhisattva or whether you're an ordinary person, the process is the same. It could be more subtle if you're, you know, if you're a great bodhisattva, but the process is the same process. You give rise to that a visceral experience. It could be self, or it could be, you know, like, it could be, when they say mind, again, when he says, like, meditate on mind, like, actually, I was, like, I remember that, like I was using, I remember a few months ago I had this, like, thing where I got a test back and I had to have a colonoscopy. It was like a thing of, oh, you might have cancer. I didn't have, it was okay. I didn't have cancer, but they were like, you have to have cancer. So in between, right, you were waiting to, like, I was like, okay, I got this test, so I need to go get the colonoscopy, but I have to wait 2 weeks to get in, to have, you know, scheduling thing, right? Like, that, like, my body, right? Like, oh, wow, that's the object of negation. You know, it's, like, really helpful then, in one way, right? You can go, there's a feeling that arises then, like, maybe there's cancer in my body, right? So there's, like, a visceral feeling. It's like, that's the object of negation. That my. It's not my in some generic sense. It's that kind of feeling of mine-ness. You see what I mean? Like, where you're grasping at something as if it's really mine. You know, and it's like, there's some, that's the object of negation that doesn't. The I that's grasping in that way and that mind don't exist, right? And you analyze that through reasoning. I'm just using that. So it's easy. That's where, like, that's why, you know, they often say that when difficult circumstances arise, it's a good time to meditate on emptiness. whatever the circumstance is, because it brings up the object of negation is the point. Right? Anyway, so that's that. And then he continues with another stages of meditation, so quoting again from Kamalashila. There is the following statement, and this statement, it says below, is from the Cloud of Jewels Sutra. When you search, so first of all, search implies, right, you're doing reasoning, right? Analysis. When you search what the mind is, you realize it is empty. When you thoroughly search for the mind, realizing that its entityness or emptiness, you realize it is empty. Through such a realization, you enter the yoga of signlessness. This indicates that preparatory reflection is the entrance to signlessness. I'm just going to pause there, right? So you get, I mean, there Kamalashila is being very clear, right? He says you search and you thoroughly search, right? And that means you come to a definitive conclusion, right? And again, it's a reasoned process. It's a conceptual process. And then he makes an interesting point. He says, through such a reasoned process, you enter into the yoga of signlessness, which means a yoga with no conceptuality, right? But he's making a point. You only get to the yoga without conceptuality through a yoga with conceptuality. Kamalashila is saying that very clearly here. And by the way, I'll just put a small point. Here he's saying also, here it's the mind that's being searched, right? So that's actually technically, you could call that Mahamudra meditation. Right, meaning it's meditation on the empty nature of mind, as compared to, sometimes you meditate on the empty nature of body, in my example a minute ago where I was feeling that, or you can meditate on the empty nature of the person. But there's one profound method, one of the objects you can meditate on the emptiness of is your mind itself. So that's what Kamalashila is describing here, right? You search what the mind is, right? So here you're meditating, you're identifying mind, and then you're meditating on its emptiness, right? So then he says, it very clearly indicates that it is impossible to enter into complete non-conceptuality by means of abandoning mental attention altogether, without analyzing the entityness of things by means of wisdom. So that's very clear. I think it's very clear what he's saying. So he says, if you have not found the view of suchness through correct prior analysis, you will not be able to engage in the meaning of suchness non-conceptually. And so the goal, you get the point though also, the goal is eventually to have a non-conceptual realization of emptiness. It's just you get there through this kind of process of reasoning at first. Like the two sticks, right, that burn down the tree. The two sticks rub, catch fire. So here it's reasoning and conceptuality about the nature of a self. When you use correct reasoning, it ultimately undermines all conceptual. First, you have to realize that the self, inherently existent self, doesn't exist. And then that, through meditation on that, you eventually destroy conceptuality, grasping at things.
Are in this like signlessness, non-conceptuality are interchangeable almost as concepts?
Yeah, I mean, well, one point, yeah. So first of all, I mean, they're actually here where it says signlessness, meaning of non-conceptuality. See, where's the word signless? It's in the quote, isn't it?
Well, it's used twice. It's used in the quote at the end of the first paragraph, and then it's the entrance to. Since we're all trying to eventually get to the realization of emptiness, and at least I think of that non-conceptualization is either there or it's the stage to it. It sounds like he's saying that that's the entrance to get.
Yeah.
Preparatory reflection is the starting point to let you in the door to actually achieve non-conceptualization.
Yeah, and I guess one point I'll make here is that here, signlessness is the yoga of signlessness is referring specifically to the yoga realizing emptiness non-conceptually. So yeah, it's a synonym in that sense. But it's specifically referring to emptiness in this case. There are other kinds of non-conceptuality, but here it's referring specifically to the non-conceptuality of emptiness. Yeah.
So really, almost all three terms could kind of get used interchangeably there then.
I think so here, at least in this context. Yeah. Yeah, in Buddhism, of course, those terms have so many different. They're used differently in different
Right.
contexts. But I think in this context, you're right.
So it confuses me often because the same term in a different sentence means very different things, and I
Yeah.
get lost.
Yeah, sometimes.
I think this one is just about the object, like whatever you're looking for. There's something like wistlessness, in that sutra we have like phenomena is without arising, without cessation, without
Yeah, that's what I was saying, because sometimes
Freedom.
signlessness could be one of the three, right?
Yeah.
Signlessness, wishlessness, and emptiness. But here, I think it's just, specifically, it seems to be referring to
The form, I guess.
to a non-conceptual realization of emptiness here, I think.
And it's specifically referring to emptiness of the mind.
In that particular quote, it is, yeah. In the quote from the Cloud of Jewels Sutra, it is. And then again, he quotes Kamalashila. In order to refute the presumptuous claim that you can realize what is said to be inconceivable, beyond mind, and so forth, by merely hearing and thinking about the profound meaning, it was taught that these objects are to be known by individual Aryas themselves. They are inconceivable by others, and the like. I'm going to pause there and just explain that first part, because it's a little bit of a long quote. There, what he's saying is, there are different, actually, it's an interesting point. Like, in some contexts, in some sutras, it'll say, in some texts and so on, it'll say, you need to study and contemplate, right? Because that's true. Then there are other texts where it will say, hearing, study, and contemplation are not enough, right? And that the profound meaning is inconceivable and is only knowable by the mind of an Arya. An Arya is somebody who's seen emptiness directly, right? So they'll point out that the ultimate meaning of emptiness can only be known individually and experientially by such a person, right? And what it's getting at, I think, is what he's getting at here, Kamalashila is saying, is actually really it depends on the context, doesn't it? Which, like, what the Buddha will say. So in other words, if somebody's never studied emptiness, never learned about emptiness, never thought about it, the Buddha would be likely to say, you need to study about emptiness, you need to learn about emptiness. And there are many beautiful passages, right, where the Buddha describes in the Jataka tales his previous lives, where he went through incredible hardships just to hear one verse of Dharma, and to listen. There are beautiful passages like that where he gave up, his life, or he gave up his kingdom just to go off and hear a little bit of teaching. So there are passages like that where the Buddha is hugely emphasizing that, because he himself did it in past lives, and he's saying to the future students, you also have to do that if you want to learn Dharma, right? But then what he's getting at here is, if somebody listens and thinks about the teachings a lot, if they're like kind of a sharp, smart person, they like studying, and they sort of get a kind of idea that because they've understood something now intellectually, they're done. Then the Buddha would say, right, only it's inconceivable. Whatever your conception is, that's not quite it. Only an Arya's meditative equipoise really understands the meaning of emptiness, right? So, because that person needs to push themselves beyond. Does that make sense? I just saw I think I mentioned this to somebody, but I recently was watching, you sent it. It was that video of Thupten Jinpa, where he was very funny because he was saying, he was reading about Tsongkhapa spending decades, right, studying and pursuing emptiness and going on retreats on emptiness and reading books and then asking the Manjushri questions and asking his teacher. And Thupten Jinpa was very funny because he said, when he finished his Geshe degree, right, a Geshe degree takes 30 years or something to study, he said he had some idea we Geshes, we understand emptiness. And then he was reading Tsongkhapa's life and he was going, well, what is Tsongkhapa, kind of some idea, if I understood, I think I understood this after a few years, but Tsongkhapa spent so long, there must be something I didn't understand yet. And so it was like this, right? He had understood it, he was saying of himself, he had understood something quite well intellectually, because he's a brilliant genius and great scholar and all that, but that he had some recognition by looking at the biography of Tsongkhapa that there might be more to do than just study and thinking a little bit. Debate. He was a good debater, probably. He's a very smart guy, but something debate courtyards, he probably won a lot. But what he's saying here is, Kamalashila is saying that's important, but the wisdom you get through hearing and listening is not the ultimate truth, right? Ultimate truth, we said that earlier. The ultimate truth is is what's experienced by the mind of somebody directly realizing emptiness and meditative equipoise. And so that particular thing is inconceivable in the sense that it's beyond, that experience is, what's the word, non-conceptual, so it can't be conceived of. We can conceive of things that are, what was the word he used sometimes earlier in this text, like facsimiles of it, or concordant with it, right? He used that word concordant. We can, through reasoning, realize things that are concordant with it and that aim towards it or lead us towards that. But that exact state is inconceivable, is the word he uses here. So he says, this was set forth in order to refute improper reflection upon apprehending the profound meaning as truly existent. However, it does not refute correct analysis by means of wisdom of individual investigation. It is said that if that were refuted, many reasonings in scriptures would be contradicted. Although it is considered an entity of conceptual thought, non-conceptual wisdom arises from it because it is an entity of correct mental attention. Therefore, those who want wisdom should rely upon it. So it's very clear, right? He's saying, you know, we have to use correct reasoning, correct analysis, and that will take us eventually beyond conceptuality if we meditate on that. And then Tsongkhapa says, it is very important to understand the way in which these statements refute the Chinese abbot. That's Hashang, what I was mentioning. Yeah.
Why mental attention? What does that mean? Why is it just talking about concentration? Is it talking so the part where it says wisdom arises from it because it is an entity of correct mental attention.
Yeah, so the important part there is like that we have to, so correct, the word correct means it's in accordance with reality, right? So it has to be, so if you think about that word, that phrase, correct mental attention, like, the correct means it has to be a precise understanding of emptiness, actually, right? But then mental attention means we have to focus our mind within that correct understanding of emptiness. And so he's saying that is the end. That's what takes us beyond conceptuality. So it's not enough just to focus our mind on anything. It has to be on the correct. But also, we can't just have a correct mental understanding of emptiness, but not absorb our mind in it, or it's not going to take us to that non-conceptual
So it's a
state.
union of both samatha and vipassana, kind of.
We'll get there. That's coming next, the exact definitions of that. But for us as beginners, even, we have to still do that same practice. I mean, the real union of shamatha and vipassana, he's going to describe what that is, which is a very exalted state. But even for us, we have to begin by gaining that correct understanding, and then mentally attending to it, putting our mind within it, focusing on it, however you want to say that. We have to do that, and then you keep doing that all the way up to the point of a union of shamatha and vipassana, which he'll describe, I think, in the next page or two.
In regards to that too, Lauren,
Mhm.
there's a footnote in the text that says the Tibetan expression can mean attention, but also more generally mental activity. So attention also refers to mental activity,
Yep.
and it says it is the mental factor directing the mind toward a given object.
Mhm.
You see it at the
Yeah.
bottom?
Yeah.
Yeah. I was wondering that same thing, and I read that, and it's helpful.
Okay, and then he was saying here, these statements were part of, he's actually saying that, like, these texts, right, he's implying this here, these texts by Kamalashila came out of that debate I mentioned earlier with the Chinese, between Kamalashila and Hashang, the Chinese abbot. And so they refute the Chinese abbot's proposition that even without finding the view that settles suchness in dependence upon scriptures and reasoning, suchness is realized by meditative equipoise without any mental attention whatsoever. And so he's saying, that monk Hashang had said, you don't need to use reasoning, you don't need to use scripture. Nagarjuna, essentially, like, the teachings of Nagarjuna, Chandrakirti, Buddhapalita are irrelevant. Just sort of, just go off and meditate. And he's saying, Tsongkhapa is saying, this is refuting that. Thanks. Then how those ways to sustain the view were set forth by the siddhas and panditas of the past, such as Atisha. So remember, this Lamrim tradition comes from Atisha, right? This whole tradition of the Lamrim texts as a literary tradition came through, right? Because Atisha wrote the Land for the Path, right? Which was, it's kind of funny. I feel hesitant to say it because in one way, of course, they say the Lamrim tradition goes all the way back to the Buddha, in the sense that the stages of the path were taught by the Buddha. But in terms of like a literary genre, it was really begun by Atisha, this particular literary genre of text. And so now Tsongkhapa is going to quote Potoa, Geshe Potoa, who was a Tibetan master in the tradition of Atisha. Like, so it came, I forget, it was Atisha and then Lama Dromdompa. I can't remember where Potoa come within a generation or two. I can't remember exactly the sequence, but Potoa was a very early teacher in the Kadampa tradition that was founded by Atisha and Lama Dromdompa. And actually, I wanted to say, so that he's quoting here this text called the Jewel Box, or this, another translator called the Small Vessel. It's like little something small that holds precious things. Is the idea. Was the name of the text that Potoa wrote. These are quite profound. I thought practice instructions. As I was reading over them the other day, I was like, this writing by Potoa is a kind of profound practice instruction. So he says, Potoa says, while hearing and thinking through reasonings, some say you settle that there is no inherent existence, but when you meditate, cultivate non-thought. And then he says, if you do that, this emptiness is unconnected. Right? So the first point there, in terms of instruction, I kind of already said this in a way, but is some people do say this actually. Still, I have friends who've said this actually to me, like times like about meditation. But some people think that like, so when you're reading a book or you're studying with your Lama or something, then you might like apply reasoning. But then when you go off and meditate, just don't think or something, right? And he's saying, then your meditation would be disconnected from the emptiness you understood in your contemplation. They would be disconnected, and he said. So Potoa is implying that's not good. That's not good. Then he's saying, cultivated apart will not serve as an antidote. Even at the time of meditation. So you get what he's getting at there? Whereas the antidote is emptiness, right? And he's saying, so if your actual meditation is not connected to that reasoned understanding of emptiness, then it won't serve as an antidote. It's what I was saying earlier, that the Dalai Lama often says. We've been grasping at a self since beginningless time, is the Buddhist fundamental view, right? We've been grasping at inherent existence. And so if we don't have something that directly contradicts that, it's not going to go away. And so that's what he's getting at here. If you want to have an antidote to that, it has to be a precise antidote that directly contradicts grasping. So then he says, thus, or therefore, even at the time of meditation, investigate, or individually investigate, that which you are familiar with, not one or many, dependent relation, and so forth. And then also abide a bit in the non-conceptual. So it's what I was saying earlier, right? You give rise to the object of negation, then you apply these reasonings, that it's not one or many, or that it's dependently arisen, or that it's not one with the aggregates or different than the aggregates. And then once you have some experiential recognition that the thing you were grasping at doesn't exist, not even one dust particle, he said. He says, then abide in that non-conceptually, right? That's the time to be non-conceptual, right? That's the time to be single-pointed. So don't just go sit down to meditate and just go, okay, I'm going to be single-pointed, right? He's saying first do this whole process, and this is Potoa, right? Then apply all those reasonings that you understood, or whichever reasoning you're most familiar with, right? So in other words, it's up to you. There are so many different reasonings presented in the texts by those great masters. So he's saying, sit down, understand the object of negation, apply whichever reasoning you want to apply, and then once you have some recognition that the self that you were grasping at, the inherently existing self you were grasping at doesn't exist, abide non-conceptually on that. And that's a practical meditation instruction from Geshe Potoa. Right, then he says, if you meditate like that, you'll cure the afflictions, right? Then he says, those who wish to follow the Divine One, in that case it's Atisha, right? He's referring to when he says Divine One, and wish to practice the system of the perfections, that is their method for cultivating wisdom. Familiarized with the selflessness of persons, they should engage in it accordingly. This is like a practical meditation instruction coming from Atisha. Right? That's what he's saying. This is the lineage of Atisha that he's sharing. And he's saying that's how you do it. Right? And that will cure the afflictions. That will cure all your mental afflictions. Then he says, between the two, this is the outline. Between the two, Majamakas and Shinarmatrans, Atisha praised Nagarjuna and his spiritual sons. It should be an S there, I think. It should be sons. The explanation of his oral instructions are in agreement with the master Kamalashila. So what he's saying here, the elder, now he's going to quote, the elder, that means Atisha. So actually I'll pause here. What he's saying is, right, among the Mahayana tenet systems, right, there are two. The mind-only school, Chittamatra, right, and the Majamaka, that comes from Nagarjuna, right? And remember, there are they call them two charioteers. The charioteer, the person who initiated a lineage of mind-only, was a Sangha. And then the person who initiated a lineage or opened the door to the Majamaka was Nagarjuna. And so here he's saying, which instructions should you rely upon if you're following the lineage of Atisha, the elder? And so then here's what Atisha said. Well, through whom is emptiness realized? Through him foretold by the Tathagata, the Buddha, right? Who saw reality, that which is true, Nagarjuna's student Chandrakirti. So Atisha and Tsongkhapa actually say the same thing, which is, on this point, which is, if you really want to understand emptiness, rely on the teachings of Chandrakirti. And he makes 3 points about Chandrakirti here, praising him, really. One is, Chandrakirti was foretold by the Tathagata. That means there are sutras where the Tathagata predicted someday, someone named Chandra will come along, Chandrakirti, and will explain the meaning of my teachings correctly. Second point is, he saw reality. That means he saw reality directly. He realized emptiness. He was an Arya himself. He wasn't just somebody who understood emptiness intellectually. He understood it intellectually, but he also realized it directly and was an Arya Bodhisattva. And then the third point is he was a student of Nagarjuna. Right? And so he's saying, this is the person to rely upon. I'll actually just share something very brief about that. I remember one time, many, many years ago, I was at a teaching by one of Lama Zopa Rinpoche's teachers, Kirti Senchep Rinpoche. And I think it was in Boston, actually, and he was teaching, I think, the 3 principles of the path, if I remember right. And I remember he said something I thought was very I guess it was coming from this, actually, I didn't know it at the time. But I thought it was very provocative. He said, he was teaching about emptiness, and he said, you won't really realize emptiness until you study the teachings of Chandrakirti. And I was like, okay, well, you got to study the teachings of Chandrakirti. If you want. And actually, that was really, actually, the teachings just got canceled by Khenpo Rinpoche. Part of them were going to be on Chandrakirti's Majamaka Avatara, right? He's been teaching that for a few years at the center. Got canceled last year and this year, unfortunately. But that was why I requested this, actually, because of that. Many years ago, Kirti Senchep Rinpoche saying, everyone who wants to realize emptiness has to study the teachings of Chandrakirti. So I thought, well, Khenpo Rinpoche is a great master of that particular lineage of teaching. And so that was, and Atisha says it, and Tsongkhapa says it, so anyway, that was the reason why I requested that particular topic for Khenpo Rinpoche. There aren't too many people who teach that so well.
Did he cancel because of the flu?
Tashi sent me an email at first saying Rinpoche's canceling because he's tired and needs more rest. And so I called Tashi and I said, Tashi, what should I tell people? Because all I know is what you sent me, that you said he needs more rest. But if I say that, people are going to say, well, what's going on? And he said, tell them the truth. Rinpoche needs more rest. And then he said Rinpoche had given an initiation in California, and that he was extremely exhausted afterwards, and that Tashi had gotten worried about him and requested that he cancel some events because he was worried for Rinpoche's health. So that's all I really know, to be honest. I called him. That was the conversation about that, and he just said that was all he really told me. I suspect, maybe probably added. I mean, if he's seeing that Rinpoche is in his 80s and tired, and then to travel and teach a lot, when there's also, it's probably part of it, I assume, but he didn't say that. But if he's already tired, and there is a high, people
In their 80s, especially.
What's that? In your 80s?
Yeah.
Yeah, I just
His
saw
Holiness canceled his travels, hasn't he?
Yeah, Dalai Lama has, Sakya Treason has, many lamas have, and I just saw the CDC was recommending that. Even. The people, they were saying anybody with either a chronic health condition or who's over 60 really should limit, if they can, should limit non-mandatory travel or something. So
Tashi still thinks he's gonna come in April.
That was the last I heard, so I'm wondering if that's true, but I haven't heard anything yet to contradict that, but I'm not so
You know,
sure.
there's a cancellation deadline this week.
Yeah, I have no involvement personally, so, but I don't know anything beyond that, but it's not my decision, it's Ani Lama's, so it's good to call Ani Lama about that. But, okay, so he's saying study the teachings of Chandrakirti. Then he says, through oral instructions transmitted from them, the truth, reality will be realized. So that's exactly what, actually I'm just pointing out, that's exactly what all those years ago Kirti Senchur Rinpoche said, right? If you practice the oral, learn, contemplate, and meditate on the practice instructions, the oral instructions coming from Nagarjuna and Chandrakirti, then the truth will be realized. These instructions set forth by Atisha in his Majjhimaka instructions text and the Master Kamalashila's intentions appear to be similar. And what he's getting there, I mean, so Kamalashila was also a follower of Nagarjuna. He was also a Majjhimaka. So that they have a similar view on that. Then Tsongkhapa says, in order to sustain special insight in that manner, you should know how to observe the 6 preparatory practices and how to act during the actual meditation session, afterwards, and in between sessions. In particular, you should know the above methods for sustaining it free of laxity and excitement. And so, I'm not going to go into this in detail here, so the 6 preparatory practices were taught in this text. Actually, I checked the page numbers, page 28 is the section on that. So we've covered those in detail. Those are like things like cleaning your room before you meditate, setting up your altar, and so on, that we need to do. We don't leave those out, he's saying, when you meditate on emptiness. And then how you actually do a session, and then all that is in that section too. What do you do between sessions, right? Like, so between sessions you don't do things that distract your mind a lot. You live a simple life of ethics and ethical life and all that. And then you should know the methods from taught above in the section on calm abiding, saying, for being free of laxity and excitement so that you can develop meditative concentration. Then he says, okay, this is, yeah, okay, so this is good. Now we're back into the section on, so the measure of having achieved special insight through meditation. So remember, that's the actual broader section we're in, is what is the meaning of special insight? And, special insight, right, is Vipassana. You could say, so that's the translation, right? In Tibetan is Laktong, so you could say Laktong in Tibetan, or Vipassana, Sanskrit, or special insight would be English, obviously. And this is where, Jeff, you had asked questions about this one time, and I said, this is the section that actually very clearly, in a detailed way, defines what is special insight, and what's the point of having achieved it. So he says, the indication that it has been accomplished when pliancy arises through analytical meditation. So, I'll read the quote first. As long as you analyze with wisdom of individual investigation, and the pliancy explained above does not arise in your meditation, it is a similitude of special insight. When pliancy has arisen, it is fully qualified special insight. The entity of pliancy and the way it arises are as explained above. So, and actually the next paragraph kind of explains that first paragraph more, so we should keep going. Yet since the calm abiding already accomplished has not deteriorated and also induces pliancy, the measure for having accomplished special insight is not the mere presence of pliancy. And now, then what is it? And here's the sentence that answers your question, Jeff, from 3 times ago. When the power of analytical meditation itself is able to induce pliancy, then there is special insight. It is the same for both the special insight observing the varieties and the special insight observing the mode. Okay, so what he's saying here, and I've kind of talked a little bit about this already, but now it's very clear in this section. So one point is, the person who's going to actually realize Vipassana has to first have already realized calm abiding, shamatha. Right? In other words, and I think that's where it's important. We could say, can you have insights before you have calm abiding? Of course, right? We all have insights. You can have, what do you call it, epiphanies, you can have all kinds of things, So, and we can even have an insight into emptiness. You can correctly realize conceptual realization of emptiness before you're done calm abiding. But special insight, that word, the special part of it means it comes part of that means it comes after. First, you have to already have calm abiding. That's one point, right? And I'm just going to explain all of this now. So one point is he's saying here, and then you have, at the point of special insight though, it's that your individual analysis, your analytical meditation, induces pliancy in and of itself. So what he's getting at there is a few things. One is, when you first realize calm abiding, you generate pliancy. But is that special insight? No. Why is it not special insight? Because that person is just engaged in fixed meditation, right? They're not doing any analysis. If they tried to do analysis, they would get distracted. They haven't yet realized calm abiding. So if they try to do an analytical meditation at that time, the ability to focus in their meditation will decrease because they're not yet there. Does that make sense? They can't yet do it. But now he's saying for the person who's already realized calm abiding, now that person begins to engage in analytical meditation. And actually what happens, right, for that person is, remember there were 9, for those who were here in those classes, there were 9 levels of meditative concentration that one goes through when one is going to achieve, and then one achieves calm abiding, which is qualified by this pliancy state, this experience of pliancy, quality of pliancy. So this person who's already achieved calm abiding, now they begin doing this analytical meditation with that, right, with that kind of mind, with their very concentrated mind. And what happens at first for that person is they can't stay in the state of calm abiding because they're doing analytical meditation. So they go down, as they're analyzing, their focus, their ability to concentrate maybe goes down to the 9th level, the 8th level, the 7th level, the 6th. They're in those higher, they're still concentrating well, but not at the level of calm abiding, right? Because their mind is moving to analyze. And then what he's saying is, eventually that person, as he described earlier, they do this analytical meditation, then they do fixed meditation. They do analytical meditation, then they do fixed meditation. They keep doing this, they keep balancing. They're trying to get like a balance. Does that make sense? Where sometimes they're too much on the fixed meditation, and their mind absorbs in it, but they're not able to analyze well. Then other times they analyze a little too much, and their concentration level goes down a bit, right? So then they analyze a little less and concentrate more, then they analyze again. And they're trying to get this like very refined state, right? And what he's saying here is eventually the person reaches an experience where they're, like before, they could only gain pliancy and the experience of calm abiding, shamatha, through fixed meditation. But as they get better and better at this process, right, it's an actual practice. It's not like it happens all at once. But they do this thing, right? Fixed meditation, analytical meditation. Fixed, analytical, fixed, analytical. They refine it, right? A little too much this way, a little too much that way. And eventually they reach the state, which he's saying here, where analysis itself, their individual investigation of emptiness itself, or of any object in this case, he says, but their individual analysis itself gives rise to the experience of pliancy. And what is pliancy? Remind you. Pliancy, first of all, bliss and pliancy go together, and there's mental pliancy and bliss and physical pliancy and bliss. But those are an experience of lightness, of, what's the word they use like this? Serviceability. Where it's like an experience where your mind can fully absorb, you can fully engage with whatever you want, with no, effortlessly, and with no obstacles, right? And you do so in a way that's very light and flexible and blissful. And so what he's saying is, there eventually comes a point where, for the practitioner, their individual investigation, let's say of emptiness, for example, itself gives rise to that deep, profound, meditative pliancy. And he says, when that happens, you've achieved the special insight. Does that make sense? And before that, it's a facsimile of special insight, but it's not actual special insight. That's like the cutoff point, where beyond which you then you label that correctly. That's special insight. That's vipassana, actual vipassana. And he makes this other point here where the most important version of that, of course, is observing the mode. That means observing emptiness. But he says the same process occurs for special insight on the varieties, right? We talked about those before. That could be like meditation on the faults of a lower realm and the advantages of a higher realm, or meditation on the categories of phenomena. But this person now is able to induce shamatha, induce calm abiding, and induce pliancy and bliss through analysis, right? So it's more advanced in a way than the person who could only get to meditative absorption through concentration meditation.
Excuse me, who's staying for the meeting afterwards? If you raise your hand. Can you count? 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm getting pieces.
11 or 12, yeah.
It was 10.
10?
10.
Including you would be, no?
Did you see that little hand right there?
Hands like again.
One more time. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Yeah, 12.
That's why I'm not enlightened yet. Okay, I'm ordering pizza. Is that all right with everybody?
Yep.
Good.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. And so now Tsongkhapa, as I was pointing out earlier, does what he usually does, which is he points out, in case you thought I just made up that definition of special insight, right, he's going to quote the Buddha, right? It's not just his own definition, right? So he's going to quote the Sutra Unraveling the Intended Meaning, so an actual sutra of the Buddha, right? where the sutra says, Bhagavan, as long as that bodhisattva has not achieved physical and mental pliancy, what do you call his mental attention that mentally attends to images within, to the objects of meditative stabilization, relative to the phenomena he has properly thought about? And it's Maitreya asking the question. So then the Buddha says, Maitreya, it is not special insight. It should be described as an inclination that corresponds with special insight, as something associated with it, right? As a similitude of special insight. So what he's getting at is, if you are meditating, for example, on a mental, your own inner experience, your own mental image, right? Because it's not yet a direct realization. But if you're meditating on your own if you're mentally attending and mentally meditating on your own internal understanding, call it, of emptiness, right? He's saying, would that be special insight? No, right? That would be a similitude. That would be, that is not special insight. It would be something inclined towards special insight, something associated with it, a similitude of it, right? It's not yet that, because it's only actual special insight when the person has achieved physical and mental pliancy in relation to that object. Does that make sense? Then he says, then Tsongkhapa quotes the instructions on the perfection of wisdom, which is by the Indian master Karashanti. He says, thereby he abides in physical and mental pliancy he has attained. He should individually investigate with special aspiration the meaning of precisely what he has reflected upon, the object that is the internal image of his meditative stabilization. As long as physical and mental pliancy have not arisen, it is a mental attention that accords with special insight. However, when they have arisen, at that point it is special insight. So here Tsongkhapa has done what he often does, right? He said, I didn't make this up, the Buddha said it in the sutra, Indian master Ratna Karashanti said it. That's the definition, that's the cutoff point of where it becomes special insight. Before that, it's a good thing to do, it's how you get to special insight, it's a similitude. I'll share that because sometimes sometimes I've gotten confused by this point, so I'll just share it in case you ever do. Because sometimes I've been confused by it. It's like if you ask a Lama, is this special insight? And they know this, they'll say no, right? But then if you say, am I practicing special insight? They could say yes, right? In other words, if you're practicing something that's going to lead you to that, then you can say, well, I'm practicing, but I'm not, but I'm not yet having, you don't yet have special insight, but you could be practicing special insight, if that makes sense, right? You only have the experience of special insight when you have physical and mental pliancy induced through analysis. Up to that point, if you're somebody who is a good meditator and you're away on retreat, you can say, I'm doing a retreat on Vipassana. It's funny, right? You could say, so then the person, if you're going to be accurate, really, you'd say, I'm going to do a retreat on Vipassana. I've never had any experience of Vipassana, but I'm going to do a retreat on it. That would be that would actually be technically correct, wouldn't it? So you could say, I'm going to go do a Vipassana retreat, but I won't have any experience of Vipassana during that retreat. It's funny.
Well, so, I mean, I see it as, this is good because we all have to go to that point,
Mhm.
right? So we're gonna necessarily have to come to that,
That
uh,
realization.
right.
Yeah.
Well, the part that where we think it is,
Oh, yeah.
uh, special insight, but it's not as similar to.
Yeah. Yeah, we all have to first.
We'll
get a
have to go to
similitude.
that, necessarily gonna hit that point.
Yeah,
Right.
that's right.
Lord, what's the experience of appliancy in a meditative state? Literally, like, what does it mean?
There's a whole, actually, let's see, let me go back. There's a,
Do you feel like you can be in that state forever, sort of like for hours and hours?
yeah, the person who has achieved physical pliancy and mental pliancy, what they say actually, I mean, there are different things actually. I mean, he goes through actually in the Easy Path, Kensho Rinpoche kind of describes in detail his experience. There is a very detailed experience where like the person experiences something like all their mental heaviness and mental physical. Actually, his experience he describes in there is very beautiful. Actually, he says like it's almost like steam lifts off your body. There's some feeling of like it's actually all the negative, all the heavy, sluggish, like limiting energy that we have. You know, we're like actually it's like I was just having this yesterday. I had like a kind of there was one point yesterday I remember where I was like I was doing that. I was quite busy, and then where I was just like, oh, I can't, like physically I was feeling like very sluggish, and mentally my mind was like dull for a little while. Like I was just like, oh, I've got to rest a little bit. People with physical and mental pliancy don't have that experience. Their experience is like, it's like they're, whatever they want to put their mind to, their mind goes there very easily, almost effortlessly. And then also their body, it doesn't get sluggish, it doesn't get heavy, it doesn't get that feeling of like fatigue or tiredness. So sometimes they call it serviceability. It's like a feeling that they describe it like it's a very feeling the person's very light, very blissful, and whatever the person wants to put their body or mind to, they can like. They something like one metaphor for this that in a picture. They have a picture from the what was it called? We have one, but of like the elephant being trained.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
You know, where at the beginning the elephant, like you have to like, you know, there's like a picture where somebody has a hook and a lasso and they're trying to catch the elephant. But with this one, it would be like, they use this metaphor, it would be like if you had like the finest thread, you know, and like one end was tied to the elephant, and then you would just go like this, and the elephant would go, like, it's this huge, powerful elephant, but just with the slightest hint, oh, let's go left here, the elephant would go left. It's just it's trying to get at that experience that you're asking about. It's like this, that your body and your mind, just with the slightest sort of intention, then automatically your body's able to do that, and it's like there's no inner resistance in your mind. We also have like mental inner resistance, right? Sometimes you want to like meditate on something, but your mind is someplace else, or it's like it's not very energetic, or it's not very clear, or so the person who has physical mental pliancy, that none of that happens. It's like there's a feeling, they say a feeling of like it's effortless, it's light, it's very easy to apply yourself to whatever you want to apply yourself.
It's like a cotton body. That's what
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Lama Zopa sometimes use that image. Actually, he says like a light cotton ball or something. Easy to move.
So you don't need to sleep. You don't need to do none of that at that problem, because you're not tired anymore.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think that's pretty true. I mean, I'm not sure if some people. I'm sure some people have calm body sleep, but if they sleep, it's a sleep. They say that actually. I think that's true. Some people who have calm body don't really sleep, and then others, even when they sleep, it's like they can't. I've read a description like this where you couldn't tell the difference for them between meditation and sleep. Like so, in other words, their mind is not. Even when they sleep, their mind doesn't. It's like their experience of sleep is like meditation or something, or in that sense that they're still concentrated. Their mind still attends to. They could like go to sleep, meditate on emptiness, and they would be meditating on emptiness through their whole sleep or something.
Would that be like 9th level of samatha or something like that?
Past the 9th level, actually.
Past
Yeah, you get to the 9th level, and then you achieve pliancy.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, I think this might be a good point to ask to think about more practical aspects of it. I mean, we've been talking a lot about the ultimate
Yeah.
analysis, ultimate nature, and then some technicalities of it, right? But also you were mentioning things like having a, an issue with your health, or somebody says that thing might not be true, or that's maybe really not true, or you feel offended, or so on. And there is the kind of conventional side of things, right? So, and there's a linkage between the two. And as I said, I think in the last, the topic has been more on the ultimate and technical aspects. How do we balance, and how do we bring some of these practices into more conventional things without saying, oh, I don't have a body, it doesn't, it's not actually kind of nihilism aspect, or like not, but there is still some, like, how do we bridge the gap, right? Because sometimes things can feel too abstract, or how do we apply them? And or is there, I think it has been discussed a few times before, many times, or is there specific sections on the text, or the weeks that you think that would be kind of addressing this more directly?
One point is like, to some extent, right, one is, of course, yes, this is very technical, this section, I agree with you, 100%, that's true. And then, in a way though, even, and then also, even this whole, I don't know, the way this text is sort of looking at this, it's largely, like he says, like the 6 preparatory practices and so on. So he's mainly addressing, he's addressing other things, but his main focus here is sort of the formal meditation session, in a way, right? That's what he says, the 6 preparatory practices and what to do between sessions. And so one point I'll make is, like, in terms of your question, is Atisha wrote the lineage of Lamrim, as Tsongkhapa points out, comes through Atisha. But then there's another lineage, there are various lineages, but one of the other most important lineages, probably the most famous lineage that comes through Atisha, is the Lojong, the mind training lineage. And in a way, the mind training lineage, I think, for me, I think it's true, is mainly addressing your question, actually. Like, it's really like, if you look at the texts of the Lojong, the mind training, they're mainly about that, actually. There's a whole topic in them, like, how do you transform difficult circumstances into the path? And how do you apply that in the difficult moments of daily life? So one point I would make is, like, to study, or if you, in terms of your question, is the Lojong teachings are really excellent on that, the mind training teachings. And then, and what they get at, in a way, and it's like, I'll just say, I'll just say a little bit, because one is that would be a good topic to study in terms of that question. And there's like the 7-point mind training, the 8 points of mind training, the weapon wheel mind training. There are many other mind training texts, but then in terms of, like, when something difficult arises, I'll just make one. I won't go too far because it's not this topic, but I'll say something about that because I think it's an important question, a good question. Is one thing I think is very important is we have to have, like, different, I think, for just on a practical level, that one is, if you haven't studied and contemplated beforehand, then you don't have anything to do, actually. Like, in other words, you have to have some, it's like we have to have a plan, I guess I would say, like, or something, if you want to, when difficult circumstances arise, if you haven't, because mind training implies, if you haven't trained your mind, actually, I remember Reber Rinpoche saying that when he got captured and he was being tortured, and he said his experience was bliss, like, while he was being tortured. His mind was bliss, But then he said, other Tibetans who hadn't done retreat and study, he said, then it was too late. Whereas when the bad thing happens, if you don't have something, you're not going to develop a new, it's like, if you don't know anything about it, he was saying this point, don't wait to start practicing these things until something difficult happens. Start now, then, and he made this point, he said, then those things will never abandon you, even in the worst circumstances. That is one point. So we have to, so the mind training teaching is something to study, and then that we need also different, this is my own experience of that, is that, and he said the same thing, but you need, like, different options. I sometimes say, like, a menu of options. Because the truth is, for example, like, meditation on emptiness, I've had so many people say this, who I know, that, like, when they're really, like, quiet and it's like a good day, and then you sit down and meditate on emptiness, and it's could be something good, But then when something difficult happens, if they say, like, actually, my best friend, I talk to often about meditation, he's one where he's very direct, so he'll say, he'll call me up and go, it's totally useless. What the hell? When I'm in pain, this hurts and that hurts, and the wife's screaming. Who cares? I don't know. Empty. Who knows? I don't know anything about that. Like, you know, like he studies emptiness a lot, but he's like, at that time, it's totally not helpful at all. Like, he's very direct, which I think that's part of why I love him. But and what he's getting at in a way is like emptiness is the ultimate antidote. But the truth is like there are times where you can meditate on emptiness. There are times where your mind's too agitated to meditate on emptiness. So you need other options then, you know, like, and so I think that gets at your question. It's like, so actually I think, I just there's one recommendation I would make, is that it's really good to like come up with like, for yourself, in terms of difficult circumstances, with a list of options. And you can know like, you know, if I, for example, like in Tantra, you can visualize, you know, like it'd be nice if the ultimate goal in Tantra is everything will be experienced as bliss and emptiness. But the truth is like, if you can't experience, I can't experience that when things are going well, I'm not going to experience when things are going poorly. You know, it'd be good to be able to meditate on emptiness, for example, but sometimes your mind is too agitated to meditate on emptiness. And then, but so it'd be good to know emptiness, because sometimes it's great. If something difficult happens, and then your mind really gives rise to the object of negation, that's grasping, then you can meditate on emptiness very well. You know, but then there are other times where yes, you have the experience of the object of negation, but your mind is too agitated to engage in reasoning. And then you can't do it very effectively. So in the mind training teachings, there's like these lists, and you can actually train your mind to like become familiar with them. And so, you know, there's like viewing things as a purification, you know, viewing bad circumstances as a purification of negative karma. Or there's, you know, taking the difficult circumstance as a way of increasing our empathy for others' suffering and compassion. Or there's, you know, there's recognizing this is the nature of samsara, and I should take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. You know, the Buddha said everything is suffering. I sometimes forget that. Now this is like, they sometimes say experience arising as the teacher, right? Like it's like life is now, you know, my Lama is now appearing as life to teach me that this is the nature of reality, and then I should strive for liberation. That's another. And then I won't teach this now, but at one point I'll say one last point is one thing that a practical instruction that Rebbe Rinpoche once said to me was, he said, if you train your mind in Tonglen, taking and giving meditation, which is one of the practices, he says that one will never abandon you. If you're sick, if you're in pain, even if you're dying, he said if you know Tonglen well, it will never abandon you. So he said that's one that like is a really good one for practicing at those times. Because then he said whenever the suffering is happening, even if it's the suffering of pain or illness or death or something, then that becomes the basis of your Tonglen. Others also have this suffering. May their suffering ripen upon me. You know, others also want to be free from suffering. May they have happiness. And so he said, then whatever suffering arises, you take that as, you could integrate it into your Tonglen practice, and your Tonglen actually becomes stronger, not weaker, was his practical instruction. So there are many different methods. And emptiness would be one, but you have to be careful that sometimes it won't, you can't, I mean, it's not that emptiness isn't correct, but sometimes our mind is not at the level where we can do that.
And an incorrect interpretation of emptiness can also lead to, like, removing yourself away from the situation in an unhealthy way.
Right.
Right? So you can say, no, I don't exist, the other person. I mean, but that can be the what you have mentioned before, which I really like, is the difference between, you know, ultimate analysis and the conventional analysis. Like, when you start crossing the paths.
Yeah.
And I think that's also a way that I feel like myself can be practicing it incorrectly whenever a tough situation arises, to think about, you know, an incorrect or, you know, slightly misinformed interpretation of that and use it against, and to kind of be lethargic, or I don't know how to describe it, like you just pull yourself away from the situation. Like it shouldn't lead to that kind of an experience.
No, if you correctly understand this, it should lead to more compassion, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, correct understanding of emptiness should lead to more caution about ethics, being an ethical person in a difficult circumstance, and more compassion, actually. So if we're correctly understanding emptiness, that would be the experience. Would be that you would feel actually more engaged in ethical, compassionate interaction. Okay. And then he says, let's see. Oh, yeah, still a few minutes. So, yeah. How firm meditative stabilization is induced when pliancy is induced by analysis. So then he says, when it is able to induce pliancy by its own power, meaning analysis, right? So this is the unique quality of special insight. So when it's able to induce pliancy by its own power, it is also able to induce single-pointedness of mind. Therefore, inducing calm abiding like this through the power of analytical meditation that individually investigates is a positive quality of having accomplished calm abiding before. And so you can imagine, I just like pause there, like it's really quite remarkable, isn't it? Like you can imagine this this person, right, who's previously gained calm abiding, now when they analyze any topic, they have this incredibly, you can imagine how powerful that mind is, where whatever mind they want to analyze, eventually they reach this point where they can analyze it, and that in and of itself induces calm abiding. So their calm abiding is more stable, it's more powerful at that point, right? The previous person who just achieved calm abiding, they have to be careful and almost, like don't think about anything. Don't analyze too much, don't engage in too much meditation, or you'll lose your calm abiding. This person, when you reach this level of the union of special insight and calm abiding, what he's getting at there is that at that point the person can analyze things and it will induce even deeper states of concentration. So it's a remarkable ability that one gets. Then he says, misconceptions about this are therefore inappropriate. Okay, and then he says, through the analytical meditation practice of someone well accomplished in calm abiding, the calm abiding thus becomes more excellent. Which is what I just said, right? Then he says, that is why you should not hold that if you practice the analytical meditation of individual investigation, the stability of your factor of your meditation will lessen. Right? So, and what he's getting at there is, of course, for the beginner who's just achieved calm abiding, analytical meditation will lessen their concentration. But if they keep practicing this balancing of those two, they'll eventually reach this ability, which is the goal, where one can achieve them as a union. And that's the next section, so I'll just start that next section now, which is an explanation of how calm abiding and special insight unite, or how you achieve the union of the two. And I know, by the way, I'll just say, I know I'm going a little quickly, but this section I think it's okay, actually, because we're going to, actually it is a highly technical section. Most of us are not at the level of practicing, where we already have calm abiding and then we're trying to cultivate special insight, but it's quite good to understand these points. So that's why I'm going a little quicker in this section than I was in the other. Jeff will help. So he says, if calm abiding and special insight have not been achieved as explained in the context of the measure for their accomplishment, there will be no cause for their union. Why? Because their union must have definitely been achieved. So it's quite funny, isn't it? Like, if you haven't achieved either, for example, if you haven't yet achieved calm abiding, and you haven't yet achieved special insight, then you can't achieve their union. It's kind of what he's saying there, right? And if you've only achieved one, if you've only achieved calm abiding but you've not yet achieved special insight, then you can't achieve the union of the two because you only have one of the two things, right? That kind of makes sense, doesn't it? But that's a pretty simple point. Then he says, now, from the point where special insight is first achieved, the union is also achieved. Does that make sense? So in other words, first you achieve calm abiding, right? Then you start doing this balancing of the analytical meditation and the concentration meditation. But at the point where when you engage in analysis and it induces pliancy, that is a union of calm abiding and special insight. So at the very first moment that you achieve actual special insight, you've also achieved a union of calm abiding and special insight, because that special insight has the mind of union, of calm abiding. He says, it is therefore like this. When mental attention is achieved by the power of analytical meditation in dependence upon prior calm abiding, that attention operating naturally, without actual application, as explained before in the context of calm abiding, becomes the union. So does that make sense? So in other words, it's actually quite important, isn't it? Like, because again, before you achieve the union of calm abiding and special insight, you have to have achieved calm abiding. You get that. That we've said many times. But also, before that point, you could have correctly understood emptiness. Many bodhisattvas would have at that point. But, the issue is, comes this very specific point where the person is doing analytical meditation, and who's already achieved calm abiding, and gets this ability where that analysis itself induces the pliancy, right? And they're realizing the topic with that kind of very clear, focused, calm abiding mind that's not separate from analysis. and from the insight that comes from analysis. And my point is that there are a few things. One is, at that point, there's no longer a need for antidotes to sinking or excitement, right? Because there is no sinking or excitement in Kama body. And it's this incredibly powerful mind. And that mind is the first experience of a union of Kama body. So the first time you gain special insight, as it's defined here, not the facsimile of special insight, right? But the first time you gain actual special insight, that is the first experience of also of a union of Kama body and special insight, because it's qualified by a mind of Kama body. Does that make sense? Okay. And now I keep pointing this out. So what you could predict what Tsongkhapa is going to do next. He's going to quote an Indian source. Right? We've gotten there.
Dr. Lord,
Yep.
I had a quick question on this. So, if it's not a special insight, it's just a normal, insight, still it will operate the same way. You have some sort of karma binding, and you focus on some object, just a relative level object. Would that still hold the same pattern?
No.
No?
No, first of all, you wouldn't say Kama body. You'll have some kind of concentration,
Concentration. Yeah.
but not Kama body.
No, not karma. Obviously.
And the second is it's not as effective. It's less powerful.
But still, the pattern is the same. Like you had some sort of concentration. On
Oh,
it.
yeah, that's true.
And then this insight or
Yeah.
came on.
Yeah. Okay, so and here he's quoting Asanga, Asanga's Shravaka levels, the levels of hearers. And so this quote begins with a question. To what extent do calm abiding and special insight mix and unite evenly? And what is the path where they enter into union? Or, what's the path to the union of calm abiding and special insight? Right? So somebody's asking that, and then Asanga is going to give the answer here. So he says, from the 9 mental abidings onward, it is like this. One attains that which constitutes the 9th abiding. Right, so remember I was saying there are 9 levels of concentration leading up to calm abiding. So he's referring to that. He says, so eventually the person achieves that 9th level, where the person has an incredible concentration, but it's not yet calm abiding. So the 9th level is associated with meditative equipoise. And that's what that is. That 9th level is a kind of equipoise, effortless equipoise, but not yet with pliancy. So he says, in dependence upon that, full accomplishment of meditative stabilization, one puts great effort into higher wisdom through differentiation of the thorough differentiation of phenomena. So that's what I was describing, right? The person has this 9th. So the person, you can imagine now, the person had already achieved calm abiding, right? Now they're doing analysis, but they're not able to yet unify. At this moment, they're not yet able to unify, what's it called, pliancy with their analysis. So they're at the 9th level, the level just before calm abiding. Right? And they're analyzing, which is an amazing thing, right? They're like at this deeply concentrated mind, and they're analyzing with wisdom, but they're just before the point where they've achieved pliancy. He says, at that point, the path of thorough differentiation of objects will operate naturally and effortlessly. Since it is without actual application, just like the path of calm abiding, the special insight, and now catch this phrase, will be completely pure and completely refined. It will follow calm abiding and will be completely conjoined with a sense of bliss. That is why calm abiding and special insight mix and even out, and why it is called the path where calm abiding and special insight enter into union. I think it's quite a beautiful description, right? So this person is they're at the point, right? They already achieved calm abiding. And then you can imagine, right? Like the person, when they start then doing analysis, they might go down to the 8th or the 7th level, whatever. But here they're getting closer and closer to this union of calm abiding and special insight. So they're able to kind of stay at that 9th level of abiding and analyze with wisdom, the emptiness, right? And then he says this point. He says, eventually they experience the process of analysis itself becomes effortless and natural. Is one point, right? And without effort, without application, special insight will become completely pure and completely refined. He's trying to give words to express the experience, right, of that person, where their understanding of whatever topic they're analyzing is extremely refined, right? Because their mind is able to stay with it and see it. It's like a mind that can. I think I said this was Gyawa and Sapa, a great Gelugpa Mahasiddha. He once said when he achieved calm abiding, he would look at a mountain. And he felt in Tibet, and he was like, oh, I can know just by looking at that mountain how many atoms are in the mountain. It's like a mind that, he was trying to describe his state of how clear his mind was. It was like he had a mind so clear that when he would look at a mountain, it was like not like he had to count them. It was like his mind was so clear it could like perceive the mountain in terms of how many atoms were in the mountain. So what he's getting at is somebody who has a refined mind like that, like a powerful mind like that, totally pure and totally clear, I guess, pristine or something, right? And he's saying, so that person gains an understanding or a special insight into whatever they're analyzing that's pure and totally refined, right? And is conjoined with bliss. That's their experience, right? So when they meditate on emptiness, their understanding is like precise, pure, clear, utterly refined, blissful, and with pliancy, with no resistance.
So, Dr. Lord, at that point they have the clairvoyance and all that. I mean, obviously, the ninth level of concentration you're talking about, you can see things, you can hear things far away.
You want cities.
Yeah.
You want cities.
He wants cities?
Yeah.
He's looking for cities.
No, I'm saying if you can see atoms in the mountain, I believe you hit that stage.
They say that once somebody's achieved combining, they can achieve the different clairvoyances. That's right, yeah, like a mental clairvoyance and different clairvoyance. And it's because they have a mind that's capable of that at that point. So yeah,
It's not by
but it's not.
definition, is it?
But it's not by definition. You have to apply yourself. There's like instructions about like, where you use that mind to then focus on that, and then you achieve it. So it's not like it's a side effect or it's something you can. Once you have combining, you can easily have those
Special powers.
special powers. Yeah. And I'll do one last paragraph, and then we'll stop. Just have time for one last paragraph. And I just think it goes along with the previous paragraph. That's partly why I'd like to do it. So he says, it's again Kamala Shila now. When the mind is balanced due to freedom from laxity and excitement, right? So remember, this mind has not even the subtlest level of, what's excitement? Excitement is where desire pulls you away from whatever you're meditating on, right? Laxity is where your mind is either a little dull or it's not totally clear and vivid, right? This mind has no laxity, so it's totally vivid and clear, and it also has no excitement that's pulling you away, right? So the mind is totally effortlessly goes into whatever it's meditating on, and totally clear and pristine, right? And then it says, it becomes clear with respect to suchness because it operates naturally. At that point, you should establish equanimity by letting go of effort, right? So at that point, there's no longer any need for effort, right? And so actually effort, there's a point, in the Kamabani teaches, it says that before that level, before the ninth level, you need effort. But when you get to this level, effort itself becomes an obstacle, right? So you let go of all, it's like an effortless process at this point. You should know that at that point, you've accomplished the path of the union between Kamabani and special insight. So as it is stated, the juncture where the fully qualified special insight has been achieved, at that point there is union, right? A union is, and I'll just mention that level of the union of combining and special insight. I'm not going to go into this in detail, but we often say there are like 5 paths, right? Like it'll actually be covered in the Heart Sutra teachings and more, but we say there are 5 paths: the path of accumulation, preparation, seeing, meditation, and no more learning. That's the path to Buddhahood for a bodhisattva. And one point is the entry point to the first path on Mahayana, the path of accumulation, is generating bodhicitta. When you've generated bodhicitta, you've entered the Mahayana path, and you're on the path of accumulation. When you generate the union of combining and special insight, that's the entry point to the path of preparation. So at that point, the person has achieved the path of preparation also. Then when you see emptiness directly, you achieve the path of seeing, the third path. So anyway, it's a quite an exalted state of mind. And I just want to, maybe, I'll read the one little quote, not from the text, but something I wrote down just to share. I was looking back over like some of the different phrases he uses, and I just thought it's interesting to reflect on. Again, it is not necessarily, it's not yet our direct experience, obviously, but he's describing like what is that mind like, right? And he's saying it's a mind that's firm, that's single-pointed, that's stable, that has pliancy, that's utterly blissful, that's totally pure, totally refined, extremely clear, and you have an insight into emptiness that's totally effortless. So I'm just describing, that's his description of that state. It's quite a beautiful description, isn't it? Like, and part of that I was pausing there because, like, you know, in our culture, like, you know, even if we haven't achieved this yet, like, you know, when you're growing up, right? Like, people think about the wonderful qualities that in their own that they impute onto all kinds of things, right? Like like, you know, like little kids think, what would it be like to win the World Series or something, right? Like, or be the Super Bowl, whatever, or win the Olympics or something. You know, and you know, if you watch little kids, like they do that, don't they? They jump up and down. Like if kids watch the Olympics, which may, I don't know if that'll happen this year or not, but when kids watch the Olympics, right, then they kind of like, you know, they start to imitate, right? Like whoever the swimmer or the runner or the, you know, or like if they like a certain sport or if they like whatever they like, they sort of, you know, like they focus on what that experience would be like. According to Buddhism, of course, all those experiences don't have any ultimate meaning, right? Like if you win the Super Bowl, it has no ultimate meaning, of course. Or if you want to be a rock star, like, you know, having like people throwing things, whatever. Like, you know, kids, like, I mean, it could be whatever, right? Like, you know, you look at that, and you go, oh wow, like little kids do that, right? Oh, that'd be so cool, and then they act like that, right? And I'm just sharing a Buddhist perspective. A Buddhist perspective is like, Lama Zopa often says that. He says like, he was watching like the World Cup or something. He was like, whatever, like the World Cup, and he was like, why are those people acting that way? You know, like why are they acting that way? He was like asking somebody, like, what are they doing? Like, why are they so excited? It's just a game. Like, what's going on? Like, why are they that excited? He was like, watch. Somebody put it on the TV and he was asking, right? But like here, you're looking at it's like that. Does it make sense? If you're like an ordinary person, you're looking at these states like that. Does that make sense? Where you're going like, oh, that's the goal, right? Like, and it's similar in one way, right? Because just like if you want to become, like, if a kid wants to become an Olympic athlete, it's going to take an effort to get there, right? They're going to have to train hard. Well, if you want to achieve this state, you'd have to train hard, right? In meditation and in contemplation and in study and all these things. But it's achievable. And what the point is this state has an ultimate meaning. Does that make sense? If you achieve that state, you achieve the antidote to suffering of samsara. So it has like some kind of ultimate spiritual meaning. That's the idea. So for somebody who's close to achieving it, they're teaching this because they need the instructions of how to achieve it. But even if you're not close to it, I just think like on a practical level, it's nice to hear about a state like that, because actually nobody ever talks about that, right? Like people talk about like, what would it be like to have, I don't know, like 5G phone or something. I don't know what. Like people talk about whatever they think is good, is my point. But from a Buddhist perspective, what's good, right? Love, compassion, wisdom, special insight. These are the things that are worthwhile. And so even if you're far from achieving them, I just want to say that, like, because it could seem a little bit like we're studying something. The earlier teachings in this book were very much close to there are things like you can, if you're studying the suffering of change, well, that's your own direct experience. There's nothing, it's not far away, right? Everything in your life changes, and sometimes you suffer, always you suffer in some way, subtly, you're always a little insecure, you know, that we can all experientially connect to very easily. These states, of course, are very far from us. But I often think that, you know, like we try to empathize, like sometimes we say, oh, empathy is good. And we usually mean empathy with the suffering of others, which is good. But every now and then it's also good to empathize with the experience of bliss, with the experience of transcendence, with the experience of, because otherwise how do you won't think about it. And then you won't make effort to achieve it. Does that make sense? So we need to actually understand something about what are those states we're aiming towards in order to get motivated and to think, wow, like what would that be like? So actually I would suggest that. Just to sit down and go like, what would it be like to have a mind that's blissful, pliant, totally clear, totally pristine, totally effortless, right? Unbelievably refined, and that can absorb into what it wants to understand in a kind of blissful, totally clear way. Anyway, that's worth thinking about, because it becomes motivating, like the kid who gets motivated to do whatever their goal is, right? So if that's your spiritual goal, you know, if your spiritual goal is liberation, then you actually have to at some point start to understand, well, what are the markers on the way? And then be like, all right, well, I want to achieve that. You know, I want to progress at least a little bit. And then even if what we're doing is just like what we said, just like some very simple version of sitting down and giving rise to the object of negation and analyzing, and we can only stay concentrated on it for 3 minutes, well, that's still quite good, you know, because how are you going to get there unless you do that? That's how all the bodhisattvas started. So, okay, that's that. And I want to just say the last thing. So next class, which is a little ways off because the class is coming up, we don't have weekend. Rinpoche was going to be here,
April
canceled.
11th.
April 11th.
Yeah.
So the next class, we'll finish this text, actually. And I'm going to set aside some time during that class. I'll very briefly go through these last couple points. But I want to set aside a little bit of time during that class, like I said, to give a little bit. Tsongkhapa in here summarizes the stages of the path. So when we summarize it, I want to sort of pause and just share some ideas about how to practice. Practice instruction. And then also, Tsongkhapa has a brief section on Tantra. And I said last time I would sort of share some thoughts about how you integrate tantric practice for those who are interested in it with Lamrim. And since Tsongkhapa mentions it, it gives permission to kind of talk a little about that. So we'll do a little of that. And then for those of you who aren't here, then after that we have after the last class next time, then we have a retreat on a half day, just like a few hours, 4 hours, I can't remember, on bodhicitta. Then one on emptiness. After one on emptiness, we'll do like a graduation as the class ends. Maybe people who want to go out to lunch, something like that. And then we'll do the Heart Sutra next series of classes. And after that, we'll do that, which will go into early, probably 2021, because it'll take 6 months, 7 months, probably. This was 5 years. That's a lot. And then people's idea after that would be maybe Shanti Deva's Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, which is a wonderful one. Both texts are wonderful.
The whole text.
That seems to be the idea. Like, that'll take a while. Less than this. It's just it'll be less than this, but. And that one, yeah. For the Heart Sutra, I was looking. There are a lot of. I'm sorry now to already read. There are like 8 Indian commentaries and then a number of Tibetan commentaries. So we'll sort of look at different ways of understanding it, and then Shanti Deva's text is really wonderful. Like I said, Solis is the best text ever written on practice of compassion of Bodhisattva. So.
Rinpoche taught on both of those in the center.
Kensei Rinpoche. Yeah. On the I was looking back on the Heart Sutra. He taught the whole thing, and Shanti Deva he only taught through chapter 6, and he stopped. And he taught chapter 6 twice actually. The first time he ever came to the center, he taught chapter 6, and then he taught up to chapter 6, but he stopped. But okay, and so we'll do dedication. Then those who want, nobody has to stay. If people feel like staying, there's going to be a meeting just about the center. So. The supreme jewel, bodhicitta, where it has not arisen, may it arise and grow. Where it has arisen, may it not decrease, but increase more and more. In the snowy mountain paradise, you the source of good and happiness, all-powerful Chinrezi, Tenzin Gyatso, please remain until samsara.